Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to another Ref Brandon and the Todd Family YouTube video. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've had a few more subscribers and I greatly appreciate it. Please continue to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Today's video, we're going to be back to wrestling. I think everyone has figured out by now that I'm a huge fan of pro wrestling in every sense of the word. And this video is actually brought about by a coworker of mine that just asked me this question. So this ain't really going to be like a top 5 or top 10. It's just me going to be naming off some random people and to see if anybody out there remembers any of these people, because most of them are going to be older school 90s, early 2000s wrestlers. So most of you that have been watching wrestling for a while should know them. So I'm just going to name some off, and I'm going to tell you here in just a second what it's going to be about. But this was, like I said, brought to me by a coworker of mine. But please feel free to comment about it. Let your friends know about it. And of course, this is Major League Baseball opening day for most teams. So tomorrow or Saturday, I'm going to try to do a rundown of a few Major League Baseball news and notes, some of the happenings, and may talk a little bit about the Braves' first couple of games and see what they're doing. We've already gotten several suggestions for pigeon forwards, a couple from my buddy Jimmy, and a couple from my buddy Patrick, and we greatly appreciate it. Please continue to give your ideas and suggestions. We'll try to film what we can, and if we cannot film it, I'll at least try to come back later on after we get back and tell you about it. But I do appreciate the comments we've gotten so far. Now today we're just going to be talking about gimmicks, and the reason why, like I said, a coworker of mine asked me about it because last week I did my opinion of the top 10 all-time best wrestlers, and that was just based on in-ring skills, and that's it. So somebody asked me who would I consider to have the best all-time character or gimmick. Nothing to do with in-ring skills, just basically, their gimmick. And most of this is going to be, like I said, older stuff, because nowadays 99% of wrestlers are just so bland and don't have any personality outside of the ring. So most of the great gimmicks were back in the day. So I'm just going to rattle off some of the gimmicks here that I've always really enjoyed over the years, and then I'll tell you the one that I would probably say was my favorite, just because I was a big fan of his character back almost 20 years ago now is how long it's been. But I was a teenager back then, and I loved his gimmick. But I'm just going to rattle off some of the names here and see if anybody remembers any of these people. There was the Repo Man. That, of course, was Barry Darsow. He debuted, I believe, in 92 and stayed around until about 94. And his gimmick was supposed to be like a Repo Man. He walked around wearing Repo Man costume, and I loved the gimmick. And he was a bad guy. He was eventually supposed to turn good, but it never happened. But I loved that gimmick and that silly laugh that he had. And then there was Doink the Clown. Of course, Doink the Clown started out as Matt Osborne, but Matt Osborne had some personal problems and some personal demons that kept him off TV so much. But the gimmick was so popular that they used a number of guys to do the gimmick. But it was just Doink the Clown, and I loved it. His finishing move was called the whoopee cushion, where he would climb the top rope and jump off and sit on somebody. And I just thought the whoopee cushion was a great name for a finishing move, but I was, 9, 10, 11 years old, so that was great back in those days. And then you had the Godfather. I also loved the Godfather gimmick. Now, if you remember, the Godfather was played by Charles Wright, but he also had some other great gimmicks. When he debuted early 90s, his original gimmick was Papa Shango, where he was bald-headed and had his face painted, and he was supposed to be into voodoo. And then when that gimmick didn't work, he came back, and he was Kama Mustafa, and then he joined the Nation of Domination, and he was just Kama. Then he became the Godfather. Then he joined Right to Censor and become the Good Father. So he always had some great gimmicks over the years, and I enjoyed all his gimmicks. And then in WCW, you had Norman Smiley, And I just liked his gimmick because he had this dance called the Big Wiggle. Now, luckily for all of you guys out there in YouTube land, I don't recall exactly what the dance was. If I could recall the entire dance, I would stand up right now and do it for you. But I remember it was called the Big Wiggle, but I don't remember the entire dance. And then you also had Disco Inferno doing his little dance, and I liked that gimmick just because of the dance he had to go along with it. And then you had Kwee-Wee, and I remember Kwee-Wee because he dressed in all pink, and that was played by a guy named Alan Funk. And he had a real pretty manager, but he dressed in pink, and he would say, "Don't make the Kwee-Wee mad. You don't want to make the Kwee-Wee mad." And I absolutely loved that gimmick. And then you also had Santino Marella. I also enjoyed Santino's gimmick, and of course sometimes he would get real funny and claim he was his twin sister named Santina, and he was great at that gimmick as well. But Santino was actually a pretty good wrestler, and when he debuted on Raw and beat Umaga for the IC title, they had him wrestle for a few months, and then they turned his character into just a comedy gimmick. But he was actually a pretty good wrestler, but he's always known for being that silly Italian guy. But Santino played that gimmick to a T for several years. And then you had Eugene. I was always a big fan of Eugene when he debuted back in the Attitude Era, long time ago. And then you had the tag team of Edge and Christian. I loved their gimmick when they would come out there and say, "Now, for all of those who have flash photography," and they would do their 7-second pose. I was always a big fan of that gimmick as well. But probably my all-time favorite gimmick, just for the character itself, was back in the days when WCW was beating Monday Night Raw in the ratings wars, and that was Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner. I used to love that gimmick. Now, I was 14, 15, 16 years old when he did that, but he had those cool cliches like, "Big Papa Pump is your hookup. Holler if you hear me." And then he would say, "There's nothing finer than Scott Steiner." And I always thought those cliches along with that gimmick were amazing back in the day. Now, if he had that gimmick today, I might look at it as kind of goofy and silly, but as a teenager, I absolutely loved that gimmick. So those are just some of the guys who've had great gimmicks over the years and great characters over the years that I always just adored, and it was basically just because of their character. Another one that I didn't mention that I also enjoyed was Val Venis. I used to love when Val Venis would come out there with that towel wrapped around him. I thought that was some great TV back in the day as well. So please feel free to comment about some of the guys that you've enjoyed their characters over the years, and give some more ideas, because I'm always up for talking pro wrestling anytime. We can do, top 10 tag teams. We can do top 10 managers, or we can do the opposite side and do maybe some of the worst all-time characters or worst all-time tag teams that most people, unless they're big-time wrestling fans, aren't even gonna remember. It can be WCW, WWF, anything like that from back in the day or still currently. I'm always up for talking pro wrestling. And before we sign off here, I'll give you my dad joke of the day. I had to stop taking my dog to the park because the ducks kept biting him, but I should have known it because he is purebred. All right, that wraps it up for today's video. Until next time, it's Ref Brandon saying, just like in pro wrestling, life can be over by the count of 3. Tell your friends and family how much you love them. Bye.